Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, coming at you with another solo video. And today I just wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about FAAB strategy. So free agent auction budget. If you guys aren't familiar with what FAAB is, I personally highly recommend moving towards FAAB. For your free agent system, if you have not. I'm not a big fan of, rolling waivers or, having the highest waiver priority if you don't make a waiver claim. I think that FAAB is just a more superior, more even playing field for the whole season in terms of a free agent system. So if you're not in FAAB yet, I think this could be a good introduction video for you guys as well to FAAB, and consider asking your commissioner to go through it next year with you guys. Just a quick introduction to what it is, right? You get $100 most of the time. Some leagues are $1,000, whatever it is, right? But in general, you'll get $100 to bid on players for the full season, right? So sometimes you get big bids on players. Like last year, the major player that got bid on was Jerome Ford after Nick Chubb went down, right? And he was kind of a running back two for most of the year. So he was definitely somebody you could have been playing in your flex, a starter for basically the entire season if you needed a running back. And so those are the kind of players, right, that if you don't have the top waiver priority and you don't have FAAB set up, like you just don't get a chance at them. And I don't necessarily think that that's as fun. I think it's more entertaining and more strategy within your waiver systems to be using FAAB. So overall, definitely recommend moving to FAAB if you're not currently using it. And then, so for the FAAB strategy part of the video, every year at the beginning of the year, I get a little frustrated with as much content as comes out of FAAB suggestions, and I feel like there's a lot of things that go into how much you want to spend on certain players, right? And a lot of times it's never framed from the standpoint of how valuable your roster spots are. So if you have a open roster spot, that should hold a certain amount of value, in my opinion. You want all of your roster spots to be as good as possible. And you also should be tying a certain level of value to an open roster spot, to somebody that you could get for zero, or for somebody that's at the very end of your bench. So for example, for one of my teams here, right, I have Jacoby Myers, who is probably my last player on my bench. And so evaluating some of the guys on the waiver wire against the best players on your team is something that you should be considering at all times. You could see, bid $30 on Carson Steele, right? I mean, that was or 30% of your budget on Carson Steele. Even Sleeper put out today how much on average was spent on him, and it's $24 of a $100 FAAB budget. And it's like, I don't know that that's worth it. I don't know that that should have been the move, but I feel like so many people were touting this as a potential boom play here, but the situation's very murky. The player that you had to drop for him, in a lot of my leagues, it was like a Jaleel McLaughlin, like maybe Jalen Warren is getting dropped. Like there could have been some pretty solid players that ended up getting cut because they are off to slow starts that aren't necessarily where we should be with the FAAB bidding, right? If you want to drop those guys, fine, but acknowledge that those guys do hold value, and that pulls down what I personally would be wanting to bid on guys that I don't think are major upgrades. So, a $5 bid, a $3 bid, and if you get them, great. If you don't, at least you still have Jalen Warren, right? Or at least you still have Jaleel McLaughlin, or at least you still have like if people are getting impatient with Rico Dowdle, or, that kind of thing, or a handcuff, you cut a handcuff. So I just basically am getting at that. Make sure, regardless of who you listen to predominantly, regardless of who is recommending FAAB bids, that you should always be in control of your league's FAAB. Right. So don't be spending too much early. If somebody gets cut that you really want, like say you really want a Jalen Warren, and he gets cut, but you just spent $25 on Carson Steele, and Warren is probably the player that would go into that spot in your lineup, then all of a sudden you're like, well, wait, I don't want to drop the player I just spent $25 on. And that becomes more and more true as the season goes on as well, right? If you spend $25 on Carson Steele, who, say Isaiah Pacheco comes back in 8 weeks, so you could get a good chunk of the season from him. But then at the end of the year, when you kind of need him the most, he's not going to be of value, right? So another thing with FAAB is you want to be spending your FAAB dollars on players you think have season-long value. If you are trying to win now, right? Again, spend a little bit of money, but like you could have probably got Samaje Perine for somewhere between $5 and $10 in most leagues. Like I think his average was 12 or something like that Sleeper had put out, but there's probably a lot of big bids in leagues pulling that up. And so, I didn't have a league where he went above $6. And so there's a chance that you could have got him to help fill that gap, or to help with your starting lineup in the interim if you had Isaiah Pacheco. And then that still gives you enough FAAB to be versatile later if there is a major player that comes available. So overall, again, this is going to be a quick video. I'll probably make more additional videos on this, and I will also talk about this in the waiver wire each week moving forward, now that we kind of have the waiver wire established. And I'm going to start adding a FAAB section to that video. But I do just want to stress as much as possible that you should not be overspending on just every week players. You want to save that budget to really go after somebody like Jerome Ford, right? Who's a 50% player. Or like like last week, right? We got news on Christian McCaffrey was going to be out, and you could get a top 5 running back in Jordan Mason. Like, go after that guy with 40% of your budget type of thing, or more, right? And that's an impact player, right? Not like Carson Steele, you're spending 25, 30% of your FAAB for somebody who might be a flex option for a couple weeks. Like, you got to make sure you're evaluating how valuable they're going to be for your lineup, and how long you're going to be able to be keeping these players around on your team. So, and again, there is value to open roster spots. You can be more flexible. You can strike easily throughout the year as we get more waiver wire players. And as the season goes on, say like you're going to want to try and plan ahead for like a week in advance for a defense type of thing, or you don't want to drop your kicker, say, those type of things. Like, I wouldn't recommend that. Obviously, I would recommend dropping your kicker, but like if you do want to try to set yourself up for success in that way after the bye weeks, right? Those roster spots become more valuable. And, as you go through the bye weeks, there's just going to be a lot of players that you need to have somebody that can produce in your starting lineup. And if that player that you added off the waiver wire has already been consumed, I just don't think that's a good use of FAAB. So again, I would hesitate really on a week-to-week basis to spend any more than 10% on anyone, right? You have guys that come along, right? Demarcus Robinson, with both of the receivers in front of him on IR. If you grabbed him last week after Puka, you will probably have to spend 5. But if he's still out there, maybe you had to go to 15 to get somebody like that. But, again, a number 1 wide receiver with a good quarterback in Matthew Stafford, that's somebody that you could probably start until there's a change with both of those receivers coming back. So I can understand that one a little bit more. But overall, I think the Chiefs running backs really went for way more than they should have been this week. In Superflex too, right? Got to keep your waiver money for potential quarterbacks that come available, right? If anybody that you think can have long-term value at quarterback comes available and you're in Superflex, you got to make sure you're ready to strike on those guys. And then you also want to save a little bit of money as you get further along in the season to be able to win defenses. So when you get later in the year, you really need those wins. You're in the playoffs and you want to be able to control the FAAB board in the playoffs. I always recommend keeping at least 33% of your budget for the playoffs for that type of thing. Like last year for me, I spent 57 on Ford and I got him, and I pretty much didn't spend any other FAAB until the playoffs, right? Until the very end of the year, and kind of made it work on $0 players, and just tried to continue to get ahead of the waiver wire or pick up guys that I thought were good that could grow into better roles. And that's how I would advise that you run your waiver wire and your FAAB for your teams. So, all right, and with that, look forward to talking to you in the next one, and we will continue to have this FAAB conversation throughout the year. Thanks for watching.